Greetings everyone, I'm Kevin and today I'm going to wrap up the first 3 months of 2023 so far. So in this video, I'm going to go through some stats. I'm going to go through all of the books that I read, how it went with all of that, and I will also compare these first 3 months of the year with the first 3 months of 2022 and see what has happened if I compare the two. But first of all, I have in 2023 so far, only counting January, February, and March, I have read 23 books. And if we start by comparing that to the same time last year, I read a total of 40 books. So I have read 17 books less this year so far than I did last year. And that feels very, very weird to me that it's that big a difference. I mean, 23 books in 3 months is still pretty good, but it's not 40 books that I had last year. But now I'm going to go through the books that I have read month by month in 2023. So in January, I read 5 books. The first book that I read was Perfect World Volume 3. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. It is the 3rd volume in one of my favorite manga series. So in this book, we followed Tsugumi and Itsuki. Tsugumi is this girl and she is in love with Itsuki, who is the guy in a wheelchair. They knew each other back in high school. I think it was high school, not college. And that was before Itsuki's accident that made him bound to a wheelchair. So this story is basically about their relationship and the things that they go through as a couple with one able-bodied person and one who is in a wheelchair. What things do they go through in society in Japan in that kind of relationship where it's one person in a wheelchair and one person who isn't, and the views that other people have of their relationship because of that. I really enjoyed this. So I gave 4 stars. This was the first book I read this entire year. The next book I read was another manga. It's My Love Mix-Up Volume 6. I can't believe we're already at Volume 6. This is my favorite manga series of all time. I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely adore this manga series. This series follows Aoki and Ida. And it's such a... I love how it all started. It's such a weird concept. When I heard about it first, I felt like, okay, I'm gonna read it and we'll see. But I really loved it. So in the first volume, in the very beginning, it's set in a high school. So first of all, it's set in high school. They have this test, like a midterms kind of test, but early in the year. I mean, maybe it's a midterm test, I don't know. But they have this test that they sit for, and the teacher hands out these bunch of papers to the people on the first row. They take a test and then they hand them back. And Ida sits, this guy, Ida, he sits in front of Aoki, this guy. Aoki first, he's like, he realized he doesn't have an eraser. So he asks around like, can I borrow an eraser? And the girl that he likes, who is called Hashimoto, she sits next to him and she hands him her eraser, and it has this little, paper thing around it, and he sees that something is written under it, so he takes it off and he sees the name Ida with a heart next to it. And Ida is the guy sitting in front of Aoki, so Aoki's like, she likes this dude. And when Ida, turns around to hand the tests to Aoki, he accidentally pushes the eraser off the table. So being the nice, amazing guy that he is, he leans forward and he picks up the eraser and he sees his name with a heart on it. And he is very shocked at first and he's like, is this yours? And Aoki feels like, no, it's not mine, because it isn't his. Then he realizes like he can't say that it's Hashimoto, because if he tells Ida that it's Hashimoto's, then Ida would know that she likes him and Aoki likes her, so he doesn't want to put her in that place or in that position, like outing her feelings to the guy that she has feelings for. And Aoki just panics and he's like, there was no way that he could go out of that situation without, So Aoki said, okay, fine, it's mine. And that just starts off this whole thing with Ida thinking that Aoki likes him. And Ida is an amazing character. Like, he is one of the best love interests I have ever read in a romance novel, or any story really. He goes up to Aoki and he says that I can't give you an answer right now, but if we spend more time together, and he's very respectful about Aoki's feelings that he didn't have at that point. But the more that they spent time together and Aoki learned more and more about Ida, and Ida being very patient and very respectful, things happened. Obvious. I love this series, so I gave this 5 stars. The next book that I read was Of This Our Country. This is an anthology. It's a collection of a lot of authors, as you can see here, a long list of authors who are Nigerian. And this is basically a collection of small stories, like short stories, written by these Nigerian authors, and it's about Nigeria, or the Nigerian identity, or Nigerian culture, everything that has to do with Nigeria. And I gave this 4 stars because as a whole, I really did enjoy it. Even though there were some stories that I loved more than others, some stories that I didn't like that much, that I was bored by, and some stories that I was really, really into and that I just really, really enjoyed. But I felt this, I am very happy that I read it. If you want to read an anthology about Nigeria by Nigerian authors, I do recommend this. The next book that I read was The House of the Spirits, which I read for Globetrotterathon, which is a year-long reading challenge where you read 1 book for each month connected to a specific part of the world. So in January, we visited South America. So I read, as I said, The House of the Spirits, which is set in Chile. I read that book. I gave 3.5 stars. I enjoyed the magical realism part of it, but I am never going to read it again. And there were a lot of things with it, like it's a big story with intertwining stories. Like, we follow different people. There were some of them that I really enjoyed, others that I didn't really enjoy, that I was bored by. And it was very uneven for me, that some characters I really enjoyed learning about them, and then others I felt like can I just skip this, kind of. So I gave it 3.5 stars. It was good, but I'm never going to reread it. I'm happy that I read it, but yeah. And the last book that I read in January was The Normal Heart, which is a queer play. And I gave this 4 stars. This play is set in the 80s in New York City. I think it's New York City, not just New York as a whole, like the state. But this is set in New York, and we follow gay men. And it's the middle of the AIDS epidemic, and there's this whole thing with that, and trying to have, get media's attention and have more attention on the epidemic, and have that more seen, more visible in news and in magazines and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed it. I was very happy that I had read it. It's a play, and I don't read a lot of plays that isn't William Shakespeare, his plays. So I really did enjoy reading this play. I think I would love to see this, like have it visually as a play, but as that format and the story and the characters, I did really enjoy. Then we move on to February, and in February I also read 5 books. But this time I owned all 5 of them. So in February, the first books that I read were Perfect World, Volume 4 and 5. I gave this 4 stars, and I gave this 4.5 stars. As I said, I just really enjoy this series. The next book that I read was We're Not From Here. I gave this 4.5 stars. This is a middle grade book, and it's basically humans colonizing a different planet, and we're the aliens. And I really loved this. I gave 4.5 stars, as I said. The culture of these aliens and the way that they're described and the way that they kind of react to humans, I really enjoyed. And the whole thing with learning about a different species, a different kind of life form, I guess, and having to coexist with them. And I love science fiction, so it makes sense, I guess, that I really enjoyed it. I do really enjoy aliens as well. And as a middle grade, I think those difficult issues with being an immigrant, this is an immigrant story, but it's told in space as a middle grade. And I think it was, I don't know how to explain it. I really enjoyed how it treated that whole thing. The next book that I read was Scythe. I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely loved this, and I completely understand why it's so hyped. I really enjoy it. It's a dystopian book. As humans, we have conquered death. We have reached a point in the world or in history where we are basically invincible. You can't kill us. You can, if we die, you can just revive us for eternity. So in order to kill people, in order for people to not, for Earth to not overpopulate, you have these scythes. So they do something called gleaning. So they have different people and they glean them, and by doing that they kill them essentially, and they can't be revived. And we follow 2 characters who become apprentices, and they are set off to become scythes. And that's everything that I will say about that, because I don't want to give too much away, but I really enjoyed this. The last book that I read in February is Beneath the Moon by Yoshi Yoshitani. This is basically a collection of short stories, fairy tales, legends from around the world. I think it's shows from like 30 different countries, like stories from 30 different countries. And I really enjoyed that, being able to read stories from so many different countries. And I've said this on my channel, I love reading stories from different places in the world. I love learning about cultures and what it's like living in places out of my everyday existence. Basically, I live in Sweden. I am 100% European, so I enjoy reading books set outside of my countries. I'm Swedish and German, so I do really enjoy that, and this definitely gave that. It also has these beautiful illustrations in it. Like, look at this. And so I gave it 4 stars. I just really enjoyed it. And then, as I mentioned, for January, I have, Globetrotterathon. And in February, we read For the Caribbean, and I read Here Comes the Sun, which is set in Jamaica. I didn't finish this in February. I finished this the 1st of March, but I do count it for Globetrotterathon because I read most of it during that month. But this is the first book that I read in March, and I gave this 3 stars. We follow a woman called Margot. She does everything she can to make sure that her younger sister Thandi goes through high school with good grades, and that she has great possibilities for university and stuff like that, that she has a bright future. The characters are very complicated. I gave this 3 stars because I didn't really enjoy it that much. I loved the story that they were trying to tell and the whole family dynamic and stuff, but I just didn't really enjoy this book. And then we move on to the rest of the books that I read in March. I read in total 13 books in March. So Here Comes the Sun is the first book that I read in March. The next book that I read in March was The Mystery of Hunter's Lodge by Agatha Christie. This was 26 pages maybe. It's a murder mystery by Agatha Christie, and I gave 3 stars. It's a very short story. Did enjoy it, but it was, as I said, very short. And that was the second book that I read. And then I read this, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the 5 different books. So this is a bind up of the 5 books. So I read all 5 books, and if you are not familiar with this is a classic science fiction book, and it's kind of comedic sci-fi. It's very absurd at times, which is why I love it. It starts off with a typical British guy called Arthur, and he has this friend that is a little bit strange, and he finds out that this friend was actually an alien, and Earth is doomed, and they're taken to space, and a lot of things happen in space. And we have all of these amazing characters. There's a robot that I absolutely adore. I think it's called Marvin. There's just so much in this that I completely love. In the first book in this, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I gave 5 stars. The book is The Restaurant at the Edge of the World, which I gave 4 stars. Then Life, the Universe, and Everything got 5 stars. The fourth is So Long and Thanks for the Fish, which got 4.5 stars. And the last book is called Mostly Harmless, which got 5 stars. So a lot of this is obviously highly rated, 4.5 and 5 stars, because it's one of my favorite sci-fi series. So of course it's gonna have a high rating. Then we continue with sci-fi. The next book that I read is Legendarium, the second book in what I think is a duology, or maybe it will become a trilogy. And the first book is Wonderscape, which is one of my favorite middle grades of all time. It's one of my favorite sci-fis of all time. I adore that book. So this book follows 3 young kids. I'm talking about Wonderscape now. I can't talk about what happens in this book without explaining Wonderscape. So in Wonderscape, we have these 3 kids, and they're on their way to school when they hear a dog bark. And these 3 kids, they don't really know each other. All they know is that they go to the same school, but they haven't really spoken that much with each other. But they walk to school, and there's this old building that is basically in ruins, and they hear a dog bark. So they go into the building to save the dog. And as they try to leave the building with the dog, they end up on a huge ship in the 24th century or the 25th century, and they have to find ways to come back home. And in this place, there's this it's like an in reality game called the Wonderscape. So in the Wonderscape, you play different games. So you have these different worlds, and in each world you have a kind of boss or a person or something that the world is created around. So that is the theme. So the first one, we have this famous person, and the world is surrounding that person, and the different things in that world connects to that person. And every world is like that, and they have to win the main game in each world to make it to the next level. So while doing that, while trying to win each world, they're also trying to figure out a mystery that is the key to going back home. And I really love Wonderscape, and this is the sequel. I gave this 4.5 stars, mainly because I really enjoyed this book, but I don't think it needed to have been made. I feel like Wonderscape was perfect on its own, and it didn't need a sequel. And even though I did enjoy following these characters again, it didn't feel necessary to me. The next book is Along for the Ride. I DNF'd this. If you want to know why, look at my rant review. Then I read a book that I feel could potentially be one of the best books that I have read in 2023, like in all 2023. It's Brother's Keeper. I love this book so incredibly much. This, I gave it 5 stars, obviously. This is about a family in North Korea during the war, because their life in North Korea is not, it's set in the 1950s, I should say that as well. It's set in the early 1950s. And we have this family, it's not safe to live in North Korea anymore, so they need to travel south to South Korea, and then the absolute most southern part of South Korea in Busan. And as very early on in their travels during winter, Sora and her younger brother Youngsu, they get separated from their parents and their absolute baby brother. They have a baby brother. They get separated from them. So Sora has to take care of herself and her younger brother as they travel alone to South Korea, and in hope of reuniting with their parents. And the things that they go through, and the way that everything is explained and described, it's so well written. It is so well written that I felt like I could envision everything, and everything made sense. The story was told in such an organic way that everything made sense, that I wasn't surprised or shocked or confused about a way that Soraya dealt with something, because I felt like I knew her so well. The whole book is from her perspective, and I felt like it made sense. The things that happened, the way that she reacted to things, it made sense. And I just really loved this book. It made me laugh, it made me cry, it made me angry, it made me relieved. Like, it was such a good book. Trigger warning for on-page deaths and infants dying, and just a lot of deaths and a lot of, sickness. And it is set during a very tragic time with a lot of pain and tragedies, and there's also death in the family and stuff like that. So there's a lot of trigger warning for that, but I really loved it. Then we're ending with 2 sci-fis. So first, The Life Below. I gave this 5 stars. It's the second book in a duology. The first book is called The Final Six, and it's one of my favorite dystopian books. And this is the second book in that duology, so it's the second book in a series that I love, and I gave 5 stars. The first book, it's kind of dystopian book. So in the first book, there was this place in the US that set out to send 6 teenagers to Mars, to colonize Mars. So to make sure that humans could potentially move to Mars. They rounded up a lot of different teenagers, a lot of different kids from around the world, and put them in this place, in this kind of camp, put them through a lot of challenges to find who are going to be the final 6. So the 6 people that are the most suited for this voyage. And things happen. There are some things that are not as they seem. There are some corruption going on, and I really love the first book. It's a YA, and I really love this book as well. That is not a big surprise because it is the second book in a series I love. And the last book that I read is This Giant, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. What I really enjoyed with it is how vast this universe is and how much we got to learn about all of these different parts of it. I love science fiction, and this is the kind of science fiction that I love, where it's more focused on exploration than it is about, starships fighting, something like that. So I love this. It's a very, very long book. I gave it 4 stars because I felt like there were parts of it that was confusing, and I felt like it dragged on a little bit too much, which is not surprising because it's such a long book. But yeah, I gave 4 stars. So those were all of the books that I read in the first quarter of the year. So if we compare that to the first 3 months of last year, as I said, in January this year, I read 5 books. In January 2022, I read 16 books. So that is 11 books more in 2022 than in 2023. And in February 2023, 5 books. In February 2022, I read 14 books. So again, a lot more than this year. It's only March this year that I read more books than I did last year. This year I read 13 books in March, and last year I read only 10. Only 10. 10 is still a lot of books in 1 month. But something that I really enjoyed is that if we look at the format, I read 13 out of 23 books. I read 13 as physical books. I read 11 books via audiobook and 3 books as ebooks. And as you might notice, 13 plus 11 plus 3 does not equal 23. That's because I read some books as physical and audiobook. But something that I do really enjoy as well is that out of these 23 books that I read the first 3 months of 2023, I owned 19 of them. And in this case, I do count Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as 5 different books. Even though it's one bind up, I did track them as 5 separate books. So 19 books that I owned, I read. And I'm very happy about that. And it's only Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that was a reread for me. I am happy about that because I want to read more books from my physical TBR. Then if we look at genre, the genre that I read most books from this year is sci-fi. I read 10 books, and then the next common one, or the next most read genre, was romance with 5 books. And what is interesting is, if we look at those 2 genres for last year, I read 20 romance books and 3 sci-fis. So that is completely changed this year so far. Then I read 2 fantasies, 2 historical, 3 literary, and 1 nonfiction. So apart from romance and sci-fi, it's very even. And then we have the ratings. So this is the first month that I actually track half stars. So we start at the bottom, we have 1 DNF, so the first DNF of the entire year. Then we have 2 3-star books, 1 3.5 star book, 8 4 stars, 4 4.5 stars, and 7 5 stars. And I wanted to go through the 5-star books a little. So these are the books that got 5 stars. And the thing about this is the 6th volume in a series that I love. 3 books in a series that I love got 5 stars. The 2nd book in a series that I love got 5 stars. And only 2 books, these 2, were not in a series that I love. So Brother's Keeper and Scythe. Scythe is the first book in a series. This is a standalone. So this is the only standalone book that got 5 stars. And this is the first book in a series. But these are the only 2 books that I read that got 5 stars that was not included or part of a series that I already love. So even though 7 books that got 5 stars sounds like a lot, especially to me, 7 books that are 5 stars in only 3 months is very weird to me. But then when I looked at it, I was like, okay, that makes sense. Only 2 books were not part of a series that I had previously loved. Something else that I found very interesting is the mix of part of a series and standalone. So I read almost 50-50. I read 1 book that was part of a series more than I read standalone books, but it's very, very 50-50. It's 12 books and then 11 books. So 12 part of a series and 11 standalones. I feel like I'm not the kind of person who reads a lot of series, but then again, a lot of these books that are part of series are part of a series that I already love. So it makes sense when I have that in mind. So that was all for this little reading wrap up. I hope your reading year so far has been good as well. I am very happy about how I've done, even if compared to last year I didn't really read as many books. But I have read more books with higher ratings this year so far than I did last year. So even if I didn't read more books, I read more books this year that I enjoyed, that I loved. So that is preferable in my opinion. But thank you so much for watching. Have a good day and I will see you next time. Good reading. Bye.